this is Jennifer with A Crocheted Simplicity, and in this video tutorial I'm going to show you how to crochet my Hibernation slipper boots. For these slipper boots I used 3 different yarns. I used a chunky or bulky weight number 5 for the boot, and then I used 2 worsted weight yarns for the cuff. I used Lion Brand Woolies Worsted and Scarfy Light. So for the cuff I used Lion Brand Hue and Me, which is a number 5 acrylic and wool bulky yarn. That yarn was used for the sole of the slippers, the upper portion, the ankles. And then for crochet hooks, I used a 5mm and a 5.5mm hook. Need a pair of scissors, a yarn needle, several stitch markers, and a measuring tape to check your gauge. Go ahead and grab all your supplies and I'll meet you back here and we'll begin the sole of the foot. We're going to begin the foot portion of our boot by working a sole. The sole is worked firstly in an arch. Then you begin working along the straight edge of the arch and work in rows all the way back to the heel of the slipper, and we'll add a couple of decreases to shape the heel. But this is approximately what the shape of your sole should look like. For this video, I'm going to work with the size 5/6 pattern. Grab your yarn, your bulky yarn, and a 5.5mm crochet hook or whatever size you need to meet gauge. We're going to begin with a slip knot on your hook and chain 3. I prefer to work into the back hump of the chain, so I'm going to work 8 double crochet stitches into this 3rd chain from your hook. The remaining 2 chains here are going to count as the first stitch of the row. So work 8 double crochets into that 3rd chain. Now don't worry if the chain loosens up and you end up with a hole. You can close that gap there when you weave in the beginning tail of yarn. So this is what your row 1 should look like. You should have a tight little arch. And you should have 9 stitches, 8 double crochets and the beginning chain 2. Now to work row 2, we're going to chain 2. Again, these 2 chains count as our first double crochet. We're going to begin row 2 and we're going to skip the first stitch and work a double crochet into the next stitch. Now we have a repeat, so we have 2 double crochet in the next stitch and a double crochet in the next 2. So we'll work 2 double crochet into this next stitch. And then 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. Again, 2 double crochets into the next stitch. And 1 double crochet into each of the next 2 stitches. And then 2 double crochets into the last stitch, which is our chain 2. So at the end of row 2, Your arch should look like this, something like this, depending on which size you're making. Now for row 3 of the size 5/6, we're going to work single crochet. Depending on the size you're making, you could be working half double crochets or double crochets. But for the size 5/6, we work single crochet, so we're going to chain 1. We're going to work 2 single crochet into the first stitch. Then a single crochet in the next stitch and 2 single crochets in the next stitch 5 times. So 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets, 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets, 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets, 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets. Now how many times with that? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So one more time. 1 single crochet, 2 single crochets, and then 2 single crochets into the last stitch, which is the top of the chain 2 from the previous row. So at the end of row 3, depending on the size you're making, your sole should begin to look like this. And this is a portion where your toes end up in the slipper. Now for row 4, we're going to work along the straight edge of our arch. Now before I begin this part, I'm going to mention the size listed in the pattern. So at the top of each different size in the pattern, I listed finished size of your slippers. So this is after we seam the pieces together. Your sole is going to be a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter than your finished size because seaming was going to add a little bit to your slippers. Working across the flat edge, we're going to work 1 single crochet into each single crochet row and 2 single crochets into each double crochet row. So to begin row 4, chain 1, work a single crochet into that first single crochet, and then next we have a chain 2, which is a double crochet, so we're going to work 2 single crochets into that row, then we're going to work 2 single crochets into the next double crochet, and then we have 2 single crochets into that beginning chain 2, which is a double crochet. And now 2 single crochets into the next double crochet. And then 1 single crochet into the last single crochet. So that is row 4 of the sole. Now we're going to work rows 5 through 10, single crochet in each stitch across. So we're going to chain 1 and single crochet into each stitch across. Go ahead and complete through row 10 and I'll meet you back here for row 11. Okay, after we've completed 10 rows, row 11 is a decrease row. So we're going to chain 1, work a single crochet to 2 together in the first 2 stitches, and then single crochet in each stitch across to the last 2 stitches. And end the row with a single crochet 2 together in the last 2 stitches. So now you should have 8 stitches at the end of row 11. Now for rows 12 to 22, you're going to simply chain 1 and single crochet in each stitch across. So go ahead and complete that part, and I'll meet you back here. Okay, now that we have 22 rows for our slippers, we're going to work 2 final rows, adding a couple of decreases at the beginning and the end of the row to shape our heel. So chain 1, single crochet 2 together in the first 2 stitches, and then single crochet in each stitch across to the last 2 stitches, and single crochet together the last 2 stitches. So at the end of round 23, you should have 6 stitches. Chain 1 and turn, single crochet 2 together for the first 2 stitches of row 24, single crochet in each of the next 2 stitches, and end the row with a single crochet 2 together in the last 2 stitches. And then we're going to fasten off our sole. Now, if you have wide feet, at this point, I would suggest you'll have a better fitting slipper if you work a single crochet around the perimeter of the sole that we just made. It's not going to matter for the upper later, but it'll help the comfort of the bottom of your slipper if you have wider feet. And again, this does not have to be as wide as your feet. If you have average width feet, the sole's not going to be as wide as your feet, because once we assemble the upper to the sole, it's going to pull our stitches out a little bit and create a little bit more room inside the boot. So now, fastened off, weave in your ends, and then we can move on to the upper. So now for the upper, we're going to use the same yarn, the bulky or chunky 5-weight yarn, and a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. So again, begin with a slip knot on your hook and chain 6. Now the upper is worked from the toe back to the ankle opening, and then we're going to work around the side of the ankles to the back of the heel. So after you've chained 6, we're going to work into the back hump of the chain, single crochet into the second chain from your hook, and each chain across. So we'll have 5 stitches. Now for row 2, we're going to increase quite a bit. So we're going to chain 1 and turn and work 2 single crochets into each stitch. So then we will have 10 stitches at the end of row 2. Now for row 3, we're going to continue to increase a little bit, but just at the beginning and the end of each row. So chain 1 and turn, work 2 single crochets in the first stitch, and then single crochet in each stitch across to the last stitch, and work 2 single crochets into the last stitch. Got 2 single crochets into the last stitch. Make sure you keep checking your stitch count as you work. So at the end of row 3 you should have 12 stitches. I'm going to chain 1 and turn, and row 4 is just 1 single crochet into each stitch across. So row 4, you should have 12 stitches. Now in row 5, we're going to increase a little bit more. Work 2 single crochets into the first stitch, and then single crochet across to the last stitch, which is 10 stitches, and 2 single crochets into the last stitch. So then at the end of row 5, you should have 14 stitches. Now your upper is not going to lay flat at this point. You're increasing, we're creating a shaped toe section for the front of your slipper. So it should be curving. So at the end of row 5, you should have 14 stitches. Now for row 6, we're going to chain 1 and turn and work 1 single crochet into each stitch across. So this is what your toe should look like at the end of row 6. Now row 7 is another increase row. So again, we're going to work 2 single crochets into the first and last stitches. So our stitch count at the end of row 7 should be 16. So chain 1 and turn, 2 single crochets into the first stitch, and a single crochet into each stitch across to the last stitch. Now 2 single crochets into that last stitch. I'm going to have 16 stitches. Now for row 8, another row of just 1 single crochet into each stitch across. Row 9, we're going to have another increase row. So again, 2 single crochets into the first stitch, 1 single crochet into each stitch across to the last stitch, and then 2 single crochets into the last stitch. So your stitch count at the end of row 9 should be 18 stitches. Okay, and now for row 10, 1 single crochet into each stitch across. And then for row 11, it'll be our last increase row. So we'll have 2 single crochets into the first stitch, single crochet in each stitch across, and then 2 single crochets into the last stitch. And then at the end of row 11, you should have 20 stitches. Okay, that's through row 11. Now for rows 12 through 20, you're going to just chain 1, turn, and single crochet into each stitch across. So go ahead and complete rows 12 through 20, and then I'll meet you back here. And we'll begin the upper right side. Okay, at the end of row 20, this is what your upper should look like. If I try to make it flat, you can see kind of an arch, but it should want to curve. So after the end of row 20, now we're going to work the upper right side. And this is going to be worked back and forth in rows that are only 6 stitches wide. And it's going to create a tab that comes off the side of the upper, and that tab is going to wrap all the way around to the middle back of the heel. And then we're going to join the yarn over on this side and create another tab that's the upper left side. So to begin the upper right side, we're going to chain 1 and single crochet into the first stitch and single crochet into each of the next 5 stitches. So you should have 6 stitches total. Now before you turn, skip 8 stitches and place a stitch marker into the 9th stitch. This marks where we're going to join the yarn to do the upper left side. So we're going to skip 8. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and place a stitch marker into the 9th stitch. And we're going to chain 1 and turn to work rows 2 through 11. Simply single crochet into each stitch across. So go ahead, complete rows 2 through 11 of your upper right side, and I'll meet you back here to join the yarn and work the upper left side and complete the upper. Okay, now we've completed the upper right side. We're going to join yarn to complete the upper left. You can join your yarn with a slip stitch and chain 1. I prefer to use standing stitches when I join my yarn. So I'm going to join yarn with a standing single crochet. To work a standing single crochet, you begin with a slip knot on your hook. Insert your hook into the stitch you need to join your yarn at. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull that loop through both your loops on your hook to complete the standing single crochet. Then we're going to single crochet into each stitch to the end of the row. So you should have a total of 6 stitches, just like your right side. And now for rows 2 through 12, you're going to chain 1 turn and work a single crochet in each stitch across. Now the different sizes may have different rows on each different side, and that is all to do with the fit. So yes, the 5/6 for the upper left side has 12 rows on this side. So your seam is going to be a little bit offset in the back of the heel, but it is not going to be noticeable, and it's going to be covered by your cuff. So go ahead and complete rows 2 through 12. After completing your upper right side, let me zoom out just a smidge. After completing the upper right side, this is what your upper, the upper left side, this is what your upper should look like. So you're going to fasten off, but when you do so, leave a tail of yarn that is 3 to 4 times the width of your upper left side. We're going to use this to seam the 2 edges together. Now with a yarn needle and the tail of yarn, line up the last rows of the upper left and right sides and whip stitch them together. I like to work a couple of whip stitches first, just to hold the edge together, and then I'll start pulling to tighten the actual whip stitch seam. After you've whip stitched the edge together, you can go ahead and weave in your ends. Now after you get your ends woven in, I will meet you back here and we will attach our upper to our sole. Okay, so after your upper is complete, this is what it should look like. And then you have your sole. Now to join these, there's not the same number of stitches around the upper as there is the sole, because I wanted to have enough room in these boots for your feet to breathe, or to wear socks if your toes get really, really cold. I just wanted them to be a little bit looser than normal slippers are. I didn't want them tight to your feet. So in order to do that, and to get stitch count and everything consistent in sizes to work out, there aren't the same number of stitches as there are rows for each one. But it's not a big deal, stitch count does not matter. And how we compensate for this is you're gonna find a stitch that's closest to the center of the toe. So in the first row of your upper, and we're going to use a locking stitch marker and hold that in place in a stitch that's closest to the center of the toe of your sole. So line it up as best you can. I'm going to say this is pretty close to my center. And I'm going to use a locking stitch marker to hold the 2 pieces together. I'm going to do the same thing now at the heel. So at the back of the heel. Now for this size, it's pretty easy because there's an extra row in that left side. So that's going to be our center. And then you're going to find a stitch along the center of the heel of the sole. And use the locking stitch marker to hold them together. Now, I go through, and this part takes a little bit, not too long, but a few minutes, and I use locking stitch markers to hold the rest of my sole around the perimeter of my boot, perimeter of the upper. So find a spot in between your front and your back that's around the middle. And I kind of try and line up the edges this way. And to me, this one looks like a good spot. So I'm going to use a locking stitch marker to hold those in place right there. And then I'm going to add another one in between the one on the side and the one at my heel. Figure out what looks good for lining them up. And then I'm going to add another one between the toe and the side. And you're going to see, this is where you're going to see usually that there's an extra stitch in your upper. And that's not a big deal. You'll just, when you're crocheting around, you can work 2 stitches from the upper into the same stitch along the sole. Not a big deal, and you're never going to be able to tell. You see how I lay the sole out and lay it around the edge of the upper. Now we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And it's easier if you see how I have this kind of pushed inward. It's easier to grab if you crease the sole or push the sole down inside that upper. Then you can grab the edges and secure them more easily. So now we're going to find the closest section or the closest spot between the toe and the heel again for this other side. And I think right there is going to be about good. And then again, place another stitch marker between the side and the heel. And then one more between the side and the toe. So now this is what you should have when you get to, after you get everything all secured and ready to seam. Once you get all your stitch markers in, now we're going to join our yarn. Again, I like to use the join with a standing single crochet, but you can join with a slip stitch and chain 1 if you prefer. So use the same yarn as you did for your sole and your upper. Put a slip knot on your hook if you're going to join with a single crochet. And now we're going to work this way with our upper on the bottom and our sole on the top. We're going to join yarn at the heel, and as we crochet we're going to be crocheting to the left just like normal. We're going to crochet all the way around till we're back to the heel. When we crochet, we're going to make sure our hook grabs both the upper and the sole, and just crochet evenly around. Zoom in just a smidge. Now I'm going to join through the stitches where I had my stitch marker at the back of the heel. Okay, so insert your hook into the stitch through the heel and the stitch on the sole. And yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through both loops to complete that first single crochet. And now we're going to kind of bend your work as you go. Bend it around the edge of the sole. And single crochet the 2 layers together. Gonna work right into the sides of those stitches and the rows of single crochet. And go and work around until you get to the first stitch marker. And then when I get close to the first stitch marker, I remove it so I can work into that. But here's what you should have so far. And if you look at the sole, here's your stitches so far. And depending if you're working right into a single crochet or the chain at the end of a row, it can be a little bit finicky. So use the point of your hook to shove it through there. Make sure you keep your sides lined up. And then make sure as well not to work your single crochets too tight, or that's when you can affect the size of your slipper if you work these too tight. So make sure they're worked loose enough. If they're not worked loose enough, like the same size as the rest of your stitches, then go up a hook size. But this is a place where you can greatly affect the size of your slipper if you don't make sure that these single crochet stitches are loose enough. Now, if this is too much for you and you don't want to single crochet around, you're more than welcome to, you could either single crochet around the edge of each piece and whip stitch them together, or just whip stitch the 2 pieces without the single crochet. But working the single crochet does add a little bit more room to the boot, so if you do want to whip stitch them together, I would suggest at least working around a single crochet around your sole to add that little bit more room. Come to another stitch marker, remove the stitch marker. Make sure as you're working around that your edges are still lined up and they're not bulging at some spot. This is why I really like all these stitch markers, because they help keep your work in place. So go ahead and continue single crocheting around your upper and your sole to join the two pieces together. And then I'll meet you back when we're all done with that and we'll begin the ankle. After you've completed sewing or crocheting your upper to your sole, this is what your boot would look like. It's the bottom and the top. Now the next part we're going to do is we're going to work the ankle, and the ankle is worked in the same yarn, and it's worked directly onto the opening in your upper. We're going to crochet rounds until it becomes a certain height, and that's going to be the inside of our cuff. Now that the upper is joined to the sole and the ends are woven in, we're going to work the ankle of the boot. We're going to join yarn with a standing single crochet, or you can use a join with a slip stitch and chain one. I'm going to join near the back, center back of the heel. So I'm going to begin with a slip knot on my hook. And I'm going to join in any stitch that's closest to the back center of the heel. And work a standing single crochet. Now I'm going to work one single crochet into each stitch around. So one single crochet into each row of the upper left, across the upper opening, and around the upper right. You should have a total of 31 stitches for the size 5/6. After your ankle is complete, then your slipper boot portion is complete. We completed the sole, the upper, and the ankle. Now we're ready to make the cuff. Now that we've completed the sole, the upper, and the ankle of our slipper boot, we're going to make the cuff. The cuff is made by first creating the stretchy ribbed band that goes along the bottom. Then we're going to join the scarfy light or contrasting yarn, or you can use the same color if you'd like, and work the mini bean stitch. Add a few decorative stitches along the top, fasten off, whip stitch it to the top opening of our ankle. Then we're going to make a button band, sew it on, and a button. This is purely decorative, so if you'd like to leave it off, not a big deal. So grab your worsted weight yarn that you're going to use for your contrasted color number 1. That's the bottom of your cuff, and a 5mm crochet hook, if that's what you need to meet gauge. Now this section is worked in back loop only slip stitches. Slip stitches can be tricky for some people until you get the hang of it. It's easy to work them tighter than you're supposed to, or that you should. You can go up a hook size to try and loosen that if you have trouble with your tension. So to begin row 1 of our stretchy ribbed band, we're going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I like to work into the back hump of the chain. So we're going to work a slip stitch into the second chain from our hook and each chain across. 1, 2, 3, 4. If you struggle with working back loop only slip stitches, I have a separate video that just goes over that process. Gives you lots of tips and tricks to control your tension and to help you see all the loops of the stitches. So at the end of row 1, you should have 4 slip stitches, and we're going to place a locking stitch marker into the bottom of that last stitch. And save that for later. Now for row 2 and the remaining rows, we're going to chain 1 and turn. And we're going to work a back loop only slip stitch in each stitch across. The first couple rows it's hard to hold on to because you don't have much to hold on to. After your work grows a little bit, it'll be easier. So 4 slip stitches, chain 1 and turn, back loop only, slip stitch in each stitch across. Now you need to work a total of 69 rows. I have a simple way of counting rows of slip stitches. So if you hold your work so that the tail of the working yarn from your foundation chain is on your left, count by 2s, count the ridges by 2s. So here's the first ridge. So we have 2 rows. The next ridge we have 4 rows. This one you don't have a ridge, so that would be the 5th row. If your working yarn, if your tail of yarn is on your left and your working yarn is on your left, you're going to have an odd number of rows. If your tail of yarn is on your left and your working yarn is on your right, you will have an even number of rows. So just a couple of quick tips for counting the rows. So go ahead and finish your stretchy ribbed band, and then I will meet you back here and we will work the decorative portion of the cuff. Now that you've completed all 69 rows of the stretchy ribbed band, we're going to join the 2 edges to create a circle. So bring your first row up to meet your last row, insert your hook into that stitch that you marked with the stitch marker, and work a single crochet into that stitch. Work 1 more single crochet into that same stitch. Now for the repeat around the band, around most of the band, you're going to single crochet into the next stitch and skip the next stitch. So some of your stitches are the valleys here and some are the ridges. So our next stitch is right here, and then the stitch after that is right here. So single crochet into the next stitch, skip the next stitch, single crochet into the next stitch, skip the next stitch, single crochet into the next stitch, skip the next stitch. Repeat that for a total of 30 times, and that gets you around to close to the end of the band. After you've worked that 30 times, you should have 8 stitches left. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you will single crochet into each of the last 8 stitches. Then join with a slip stitch, fasten off and weave in your ends. And I'll meet you back here to begin the textured portion of the cuff. Once you've prepared the edge of your stretchy ribbed band, joined your yarn, fastened off and woven in ends, you need to place a stitch marker in the 19th stitch. So begin with the first stitch that you worked around the edge of the band and count over 19 stitches. Place your stitch marker. This is where we're going to join the yarn, the scarfy light yarn, for the textured portion of the cuff. So you can join yarn with a slip stitch in that stitch. You can either put a slip knot on your hook or just a loop. I like to do the slip knot method, weave the tail in later. So join yarn with a slip stitch in that stitch marked with a stitch marker. Chain 1, and we're going to work a mini bean stitch in the first stitch. So insert your hook in the first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all the loops to complete the stitch. Now, if you feel like you want your stitch to be puffier, you can yarn over and insert into the same stitch one more time to add more loops to your hook. Not a big deal. So the stitch pattern for around the cuff, after you complete the mini bean stitch, is a chain 1. Make sure that you don't work your chains too tight or it will cause your cuff to cinch in. Make sure that the loops of your chain are the same size as the top loops of your stitches. Then we're going to skip the next stitch, work a mini bean stitch in the next stitch, insert your hook, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, insert your hook into the same stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through all loops on your hook. Chain 1, skip the next stitch. We're going to repeat that all the way around and then join with a slip stitch to the first mini bean stitch. And then chain 1 and turn. Now for rounds 2 through 8, we're going to chain 1 and turn and work a mini bean stitch into the first chain 1 space. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, work a mini bean stitch into the next chain 1 space. Repeat that all the way around. Join and turn. We're going to do that for a total of 8 rounds. You have 8 rounds of mini bean stitch. Go ahead and repeat rounds 2 through 8, and I'll meet you back here to begin round 9. After you've completed round 8 of the textured cuff, you're going to fasten off the Scarfy Light or the CC2 yarn and join your CC1 yarn. In this case is the Lion Brand Woolies and Fisherman. Then we're going to chain 1, you can tighten this up later or knot it and then weave in ends later. So chain 1, we're going to work a single crochet for round 9 on the right side of your cuff, single crochet into the first chain 1 space, and then we're going to work a spike single crochet into the next mini bean stitch from the previous round. So you're going to work into this stitch right here, this mini bean stitch, and all the spike stitch is working down further than you normally would. So you're not working into the stitches the same round, you're working into a previous round. So insert your hook into the mini bean stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. Make sure you pull it up as high as the other stitches of the current round, otherwise you'll cinch your work. And then yarn over, pull through loops to complete the spike single crochet. Then single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and a spike single crochet into the next mini bean stitch from the previous round. And then you're just going to continue around, working a single crochet into the next chain 1 space, and a spike single crochet into the next mini bean stitch from the previous round. I'm going to do that all the way around the cuff, and then join with a slip stitch to the first stitch. Go ahead and complete round 9, and then fasten off and leave a tail of yarn that's 3 to 4 times the circumference of your cuff. So the circumference is all the way around the opening. So 3 times around, then cut your yarn. And then I'll meet you back here and we'll make a faux buttonhole strap and then put everything together. Once your textured cuff is complete, you've fastened off and left a tail of yarn long enough to attach the top of the cuff to the top of the opening on your ankle. I'm going to set that aside. We're going to make a faux buttonhole strap. So we're just going to make this simple little piece right here. So grab your CC1 yarn. In this case it's the Woolies and Fisherman that I'm using. 5mm hook. And chain 11. 2, 3. Again, working into the back humps of the chain. I'm going to work 3 single crochets into the second chain from your hook. All we're doing is making an easy oval. And then 1 single crochet into each of the remaining chains across to the last chain, and then 3 single crochets into the last chain. Then we're going to rotate and work on the opposite side of the foundation chain. So single crochet into the next 8 chains. And then 3 single crochets into the last chain. And then 1 single crochet into the other side of the foundation chain. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're going to join with the slip stitch. Join with a slip stitch to that first single crochet, and then fasten off and weave in ends. Now when you fasten off, leave a tail of yarn that is like 3 times the perimeter of your little button strap, because we're going to attach this. We need the tail of yarn to attach it to the cuff. So once you're done with that, set that aside. And then we're going to attach the cuff to the top of the slipper boot opening, or the top of the ankle. So grab one of your slipper boots, and the first thing we're going to do is position the cuff so that the slit is on either the right or the left side of your slipper, depending on which foot you're making it for. Slip it over the top of the slipper, and then use that tail of yarn and the yarn needle to whip stitch. First of all, line this up along the side. Once it's in place, then whip stitch the top of the cuff to the stitches from the ankle. You're going to have more stitches in your cuff than you will your ankle, and that's fine. So in some of the stitches, you're just going to have to double up and whip stitch a couple of times. Not a big deal, just make sure you whip stitch evenly. If you need to, you can use a stitch marker or a couple of them to hold this in place as you work. Sometimes that's a good idea. And with this having the slit in the side that you kind of want to stay put, it's a really good idea. At least to put one where that slit is. And then simply whip stitch the stitches from the last round of the cuff to the top opening edge of your slipper boot. I'm sure I held off too much yarn when I fastened off, but I'd rather have more than not enough, because that's less ends to weave in. So go ahead and complete this, attach the top of your cuff, and then I'll meet you back here and we'll attach the little buttonhole strap. Once you've completed your cuff and your faux buttonhole strap, grab your slipper boot, and we're going to attach the cuff to the slipper boot. Now there's a slit in the side of the stretchy ribbed band. So since you are making 2 different slippers for 2 different feet, make sure that you position the slit on the right side of the one boot and on the left side for the other boot. Now, because you don't want that slit to move while you're joining the top of the openings together, use a locking stitch marker somewhere around where that slit opening is. Get it positioned where you want it. And use a locking stitch marker to hold the cuff in place along the opening of the ankle. Then with your yarn needle and your tail of yarn left, simply whip stitch the top of the cuff to the top opening edge of the ankle of your boot. Now you'll have more stitches around the cuff than you do the opening of the ankle. That's fine. You'll just have to whip stitch through a couple of the stitches on the ankle twice to compensate for that. You can start anywhere, line up the best you can, and whip stitch the top of your slipper boot to the top of the ankle. Zoom in just a little bit. And repeat that all the way around the opening to attach your cuff. When you're done with that, we're going to attach the faux button strap to the cuff. After you've whip stitched the top of the cuff to the opening of your slipper, you can weave in your ends. And then we're going to finish off our slipper by attaching our faux buttonhole strap. We're going to position it right above the slit, one end of it right above the slit in the side, and then it's going to go straight up to the top edge of the cuff. So position it there and then sew in and out through several of the stitches to tack stitch it in place, only working through the cuff, not through the boot itself. So position it about right there, and then just sew it, working up and down in several different places along the button strap. You don't have to go through every stitch. Attach it to the cuff. Now once you sew up alongside one edge, make sure to tack it to the top edge of your cuff, and then sew back down along the other edge and weave in your ends. And then the last thing to do is attach a button. I attached my button, I made it a little bit wider than my buttonhole strap, just because it's a fake strap, and then just sewed it towards the end of the strap, and I left this to peekaboo out just a little bit, the bottom edge of that strap. I used yarn to sew my button on, but if you have a button with smaller holes in the center, you're going to have to use a needle and thread. But that's it, and I only stitched it through the cuff, not through the slipper boot itself. If you have any questions for me on completing your slippers, you can send me an email at acrochetedsimplicity.com, leave a comment on the video or a comment on the blog post, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. I hope you've enjoyed this video tutorial and it's helped you become successful in making your Hibernation crochet slipper boots. Happy crocheting! Have a great day!